I was 63 years old the morning I sat at my kitchen table in Sudbury and counted what I had left, not in a dramatic way. Not the way people do in movies, with bills spread across the floor and a single lamp casting shadows. I just opened my laptop, pulled up my online banking, and stared at the number. $41,218. That was everything. That was my teacher's pension payout, my RRSP I'd cashed early and paid the penalty on, and the small amount my late husband Gordon had left behind. $41,000, and my son owed the bank $280,000. I closed the laptop. I made tea. I stood at the window and watched the snow fall on the birch trees in the backyard. The same birch trees Gordon had planted the year Liam was born. And I thought about how thoroughly I had failed at keeping this family together. Liam hadn't done anything wrong. I want to be clear about that, because people always assume. He'd co-signed a loan for his business partner, a man he'd trusted for 11 years, and that man had disappeared to somewhere warm with money that wasn't his. The bank didn't care about the story. They cared about the signature, my son's signature, and when the collections call started, when the letters arrived with language I had to read 3 times to understand, Liam didn't tell me for 4 months. He was protecting me. He'd always been like that, even as a little boy. He'd fall off his bike and tell me he was fine before the blood had even stopped. I found out by accident. He left a voicemail on the landline. I still have a landline, don't laugh. And he'd meant to call his wife but dialed me instead. I heard 40 seconds of him explaining to her that they might have to sell the house, their house, the one with the yellow door and the garden she'd spent 3 summers building. I called him back and told him I knew. He went quiet in the way that meant he was trying not to cry. That was October. By January, I still hadn't found a solution. A friend of mine, we'd taught together at La Salle Secondary for 20 years, mentioned something at book club one evening. She said her neighbor's cousin had done something unusual. An arrangement, a private arrangement with someone who needed a particular kind of companionship and was willing to pay for it legally. She said it as a footnote, almost embarrassed, and then moved on to talking about the novel. I didn't move on to talking about the novel. I sat there with my wine and I thought about it for the rest of the night. It took me 2 weeks to find the name of the lawyer who'd arranged it. It took another week to make the call, and it took 1 phone call with that lawyer, a measured, careful man named Mr. Burr, Okafor, who spoke like he'd had this conversation before and didn't judge anyone for it, to understand that what I was considering was real, legal, and not uncommon in certain circles. There was a man, Mr. Okafor explained, a private individual. He had specific requirements. He needed a companion, a wife, legally, for a period of 1 year. He was not looking for romance. He was not looking for a nurse or a housekeeper. He was looking for someone with a stable reputation, a calm disposition, and the ability to attend occasional formal functions without drawing attention to herself. He would pay $250,000 upon signing. At the end of the year, upon an amicable dissolution, there would be an additional $40,000. I asked why. Mr. Okafor said that wasn't information he was authorized to share, but that I would be permitted to ask the man directly if I wished to proceed to a meeting. I said I'd think about it. I thought about it for 1 day. Then I called back and said yes to the meeting. The house was outside Collingwood, about 2 hours from Sudbury. I drove myself because I didn't want anyone to know where I was going. I told Liam I was visiting an old friend from Teachers College. I told myself I was just going to look, just to see. The property was set back from the road, up a long driveway lined with spruce trees that had grown so tall they met overhead in a kind of arch. The house itself wasn't ostentatious. That surprised me. I'd expected something that announced itself. Instead, it was large but quiet-looking, white clapboard, a wide porch, dark green shutters. It looked like a house that had been there for 100 years and intended to be there for 100 more. A woman answered the door. She introduced herself only as the property manager and led me through a front hall that smelled of wood smoke and old books into a sitting room where a fire was burning low. She said he would be down in a few minutes and offered me tea. I said yes to the tea. He came down 7 minutes later. I know because I counted. I was that nervous. He was taller than I'd expected. 70 perhaps, or close to it. silver-haired with a lean face and dark eyes that assessed me immediately and thoroughly in a way that was not unkind, but wasn't warm either. He was wearing a dark wool sweater and, I noticed it right away, though I told myself not to, a pair of thin leather gloves. Dark brown? Fitted. Light driving gloves, the kind men wore in old photographs. He didn't offer to shake hands. He sat across from me and looked at me steadily and said, "You're a retired teacher." 31 years, I said. "You're here because of your son." It wasn't a question, and it landed strangely, because Mr. Okafor had told me the details I'd shared were kept confidential. I didn't know what to say, so I said partially. He nodded like that was the right answer. "I appreciate the honesty," he said. We talked for just over an hour. He explained his requirements plainly, without embarrassment, and I found I respected that. He needed someone who could accompany him to 2 or 3 events per year, a foundation dinner in Toronto, perhaps a reception in Ottawa, and who could be introduced as his wife without raising questions. He lived quietly. He did not entertain. He did not want conversation that required effort. He read. He walked the property in the mornings. He would ask very little of me in terms of companionship, and he would respect my privacy completely. I asked him why he needed a wife at all then. He was quiet for a moment. "There are people," he said carefully, "who would take advantage of a man in my position if they believed he was entirely alone. A wife makes certain things less complicated." I thought about that. "And the gloves?" I said. I don't know why I asked. It came out before I'd decided to. He looked at me with something that was almost, not quite, surprise. Then he said, "That's my business." "Of course," I said. "I'm sorry." He studied me for a moment. Then he said, "You didn't flinch." "Pardon?" "When you asked. Most people either pretend not to notice or they stare. You just asked." He paused. I found that refreshing. I signed the papers 2 weeks later. Mr. Okafor walked me through everything, the terms, the timelines, the confidentiality clauses. The money arrived in my account on the same day the marriage certificate was registered. I transferred it to Liam that afternoon. I didn't tell him where it came from. I told him Gordon had a small insurance policy I'd forgotten about, that I'd only just found the paperwork. He asked if I was sure. I said yes. He cried on the phone, which he hadn't done since his father's funeral, and I sat in my car in the parking lot of a Tim Hortons and stared at the ceiling and told myself I'd done the right thing. I moved into the house in Collingwood on a Saturday in February. The property manager, her name was Rosemary, and she turned out to be one of those people who communicate entirely through efficiency and occasional dry humor. Showed me to a bedroom on the 2nd floor that had its own bathroom and a window looking out at the frozen lake. She said he preferred the east wing. I was welcome to the rest of the house as I liked. He and I ate dinner together most evenings. That surprised me. I'd expected to be more separate than we were, but he would appear in the dining room at 6:30, and Rosemary would have left something on the stove, and we would sit across from each other and eat and occasionally speak. Not always. Some evenings we said almost nothing beyond the practical, whether the roads were bad, whether the forecast was calling for more snow. Other evenings he would ask me something. The questions were always precise. He never asked about my feelings. He asked about things that had happened. He asked about a specific student I'd mentioned, a girl who'd struggled to read until grade 9, and then became the best writer in the class. He remembered details I'd mentioned in passing and returned to them weeks later. It was disconcerting at first, and then it was something else. It was like being seen by someone who wasn't trying to see you, who just happened to notice. I learned small things about him, the way you learn anything in a quiet house. Slowly, around the edges. He had been an engineer. Civil. He'd built things. Bridges, specifically in Northern Ontario and British Columbia. He'd retired early, 14 years ago. He had no children. He had a brother in Halifax he spoke to on the phone every Sunday for exactly 20 minutes, always from the study with the door closed. He always wore the gloves, inside and outside, every day. Rosemary treated this as entirely unremarkable, which meant it had been that way for a very long time. I stopped noticing them the way you stop noticing a person's accent. They became part of him, just another thing that was simply true. March turned to April. The ice on the lake broke up. I started walking the property in the mornings the same way he did, and sometimes we walked at the same time without planning it. And we would go along the path by the tree line without speaking much, and it was not uncomfortable. It was surprisingly not uncomfortable. One morning, he stopped and pointed out a pair of sandhill cranes on the far edge of the field. He said they came back to the same field every year. He said his wife had loved watching them. He said it so naturally that it took me a moment to realize what I'd heard. I glanced at him. His face hadn't changed. He was still watching the cranes. "You were married before," I said. "Yes." I waited, but he didn't offer more, and I didn't push. We walked back to the house in silence, and over breakfast he asked me if I'd read anything lately worth recommending, and we moved on. But I thought about it. I thought about the fact that he had been married. I thought about the way Rosemary sometimes set 3 places at the dining table before catching herself and removing one. I thought about the photograph I'd seen once in the sitting room, propped against the bookshelf, a frame facing away from the room, only the back of it visible. I'd almost turned it around. I hadn't. It was a Thursday night in May when I heard the sound. I'd been awake anyway. I called Liam that evening and he told me things were stabilizing, that the bank had accepted a restructured repayment, that his wife's garden was going to be okay. I'd gone to bed feeling lighter than I had in months and then lain there unable to sleep anyway, which is the particular cruelty of relief. The sound came from the study at the end of the East Hall. A crash, and then silence, and then a low sound I couldn't immediately identify. I got up. The door to the study was not fully closed. I knocked anyway, softly, and when there was no answer I pushed it open. He was on the floor. Not collapsed. He'd caught himself against the side of the desk, and he was half sitting, half kneeling, and he was clearly in pain. A stack of books had come down with him and were scattered around the floor. His right glove was off. I saw his hand. I should explain what I mean when I say that because it's not a dramatic thing. What I saw, it wasn't shocking in the way people imagine. His hand was scarred, severely along the back of the hand and up the wrist, the kind of scarring that comes from a burn, where the skin has healed in ridges and the color has changed and the texture is different from what surrounds it. His fingers were slightly contracted at rest. It looked like it had healed a long time ago, but it had healed hard. He saw me see it. He reached for the glove immediately and I said quietly, "Don't." He stopped. I crossed the room and crouched down beside him and said, "Are you hurt? Beyond the hand, I mean. Did you fall badly?" He said his ankle. He'd caught it on the leg of the chair. I checked his ankle the way 31 years of dealing with children had taught me to check things, practically, without fuss. It wasn't broken. He'd twisted it. I helped him to the chair by the desk, brought him ice from the kitchen wrapped in a tea towel, and sat in the other chair while he held it against his ankle, and neither of us said anything for a long time. Eventually he said, "How long have you been waiting to ask? About your hand?" "Yes. Since the first day," I said, "when you didn't shake hands." He looked at the ice pack. "It was a fire," he said, 14 years ago, on a work site, one of our projects. Outside Kenora, there was a fuel leak and it went up faster than anyone expected. 2 of my crew got out, 1 didn't." He paused. I got him out, but not fast enough. I said nothing. I understood, now, the retirement, the house set back from everything, the brother on the phone every Sunday for exactly 20 minutes, the crew member, he said. His name was Darren. He had 3 kids. The youngest was 4. He stopped again. "The gloves are, I know it seems. People look at me differently when they see it. And I couldn't. After Darren, I couldn't have people looking at me with, I couldn't." He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't have to. I thought about Gordon, who died of a heart attack on a perfectly ordinary Tuesday morning and had not been able to say goodbye to anyone. I thought about the way grief makes people do all sorts of things that look strange from the outside and make complete sense from the inside. "You didn't cause the fire," I said. He looked at me. "I'm not saying that to make you feel better," I said. "I'm saying it because you already know it and you've spent 14 years not letting yourself believe it." He was quiet for a long time. The study was dim. Outside the window, the May night was dark and still, and somewhere across the field the sandhill cranes were asleep in the grass. "My wife," he said finally, "never saw it. The hand. She died before the accident. Cancer, 3 years before." He turned the scarred hand over slowly, looking at it. I think sometimes that was the only mercy. She didn't have to see me like this. She would have helped you through it, I said. I know she would have, he said. That's exactly the problem. I would have let her. I didn't entirely understand that then. I think I understand it better now. Things were different after that night. Not dramatically. Nothing shifted overnight. But he stopped always reaching for the gloves first thing in the morning. Some days he wore them. Most days he still did. But sometimes when we were just in the house, just reading or sitting at the table, he didn't. And he never commented on it, and I never commented on it, and somehow that was the right way to do it. We started talking more in the evenings, not about important things necessarily, about the books he was reading, about a documentary series I'd gotten him to try and that he'd then watched 3 episodes of before admitting it was good. He told me about the bridges. He described one he'd worked on in northwestern BC, a crossing over a canyon, and the way it felt to stand on it the first time the load tests came back successful. He said it was the only time in his professional life he'd cried. I told him about a student of mine named Petey, his legal name, who had been absolutely determined to fail grade 10 English and had somehow written an essay in April of that year that made the entire English department pass it around the staff room. He laughed at that. A real laugh, not a polite one. I found I was looking forward to dinner. I found I was thinking about him during the day in the mild, ambient way you think about someone who has become part of your daily life, the way you think about the weather or the birds or what you'll make for tea. I did not let myself think about what that meant for another 2 months. In August, his brother came to visit from Halifax. His name was Robert, and he was 10 years younger and nothing like him in temperament, loud and warm and prone to hugging people he just met. Which meant he hugged me immediately and thoroughly on arrival, and I caught a look on his host's face that was so quickly suppressed I almost missed it. Later, Robert found me on the porch, he said, and he said it in the gentle, careful way of someone who has been worrying about his brother for a long time. I haven't seen him like this in years. I didn't know what to say, so I said, like what? Robert looked out at the field. Present, he said. September arrived, then October. We were 8 months into a 12-month agreement. I had stopped being careful about not thinking about what things meant. One evening in October, he said, over dinner, "You're going to leave in February." It wasn't a question, but it wasn't quite a statement either. It was the kind of sentence that leaves a space at the end. That was the agreement, I said. He looked at his plate. He said, yes. I said, do you want it to still be? He looked up. I said, I'm not asking you to answer that right now. I'm just asking if you've thought about it. He said, I've thought about almost nothing else since June. I put my fork down. Outside, the October wind was pulling the last of the leaves off the birch trees along the driveway, and the lake was gray and choppy, and the house was warm and smelled of whatever Rosemary had left on the stove, and I sat across from a man I had married for money and thought, well, here we are. I have one condition, I said. He raised an eyebrow. You let me meet Darren's family. I want to take something to them. From you, if you'll let me. I think it's time. He was very still. You don't have to come, I said. Not this time, but I think you should start. I think you should stop paying for something you didn't do. He looked at his hands, both of them ungloved that evening for a long time. Okay, he said. Okay. We went to Kenora in November. Both of us, in the end. Darren's wife, his widow, was a quiet woman named Joanne, who served us coffee in a living room with 3 kids' school photos lined up on the mantel. The youngest, who had been 4 at the time of the accident, was now 18 and studying to be an electrician. Joanne said she had made peace with it years ago. She said she was glad we came. She said Darren would have found the whole thing, the gloves, the isolation, the guilt, completely unnecessary, and she said it with a kind of gentle, tired affection that told me she'd known him well. On the drive home, he didn't speak for a long time. I drove because his ankle still bothered him in cold weather. The highway was quiet, the dark fields on either side lit occasionally by farmhouse windows. He said, "Thank you for making me do that." I said, "I didn't make you do anything. You know what I mean." I did know what he meant. He looked out the passenger window for a while. Then he said, "I'd like to renegotiate the terms of our agreement." I had a feeling, I said. The financial arrangement would obviously be, "I don't want more money," I said. I know. I was going to say it's yours to keep and I won't make it strange." He paused. "What I'm actually trying to say, which I'm apparently making quite difficult, is that I would like you to stay. Not because of the functions or because of whatever I told Mr. Okafor I needed. Just because," he stopped. "Just because February shouldn't be the end of it." I kept my eyes on the road. The headlights cut through the dark. In a field somewhere to the left, the sandhill cranes were probably long gone south by now, but they'd come back. They always came back to the same field. "It won't be," I said. "I called Liam at Christmas and told him I'd met someone." There was a long pause, and then he laughed. A surprised, delighted laugh that sounded just like his father's. He asked how. I said it was a long story. He said he had time. I said I'd tell him at Easter, when we came for dinner. Both of us. He said, "Both of you?" I said yes. Another pause. Then, "Mum, are you happy?" I was standing at the window in the upstairs bedroom, the one with the view of the frozen lake. Across the hall, I could hear the low sound of the radio from the study. The birch trees along the driveway had ice on the branches and they caught the afternoon light in a way that made the whole yard look like something from an old painting. "Yes," I said, "I really am." I meant it. That was the part I hadn't expected. Not the money, not the arrangement, not even the way things turned out. The part I hadn't expected was how thoroughly I meant it. Some things begin as transactions and end as something else entirely. You cannot plan for it. You cannot arrange for it. You can only notice it when it's happening and decide not to look away. That's the only piece of advice I have, at 63, having done what I've done. Don't look away from the things that grow quietly. They're usually the ones that last. I didn't go to Collingwood looking for anything except a way to fix what had broken. That's the honest truth of it. I went because my son needed help, and I had run out of other options. And when you're 63, and you spent your whole life being a practical one, the one who made the lunches and marked the papers and showed up, practicality is the only tool you trust anymore. But here's what I've come to understand. Looking back at this past year, the decisions we make for entirely practical reasons have a way of taking us somewhere we never budgeted for. I chose to marry a man I didn't know because Liam needed to keep his house. That was the cause. Clear, simple, transactional. What I didn't account for, what you can never account for on a contract, is what happens when you sit across from someone every evening for months and actually pay attention, not trying to fix them, not performing kindness. Just paying attention. That's rarer than people think. And it turns out it's exactly what two quietly lonely people needed most. He had spent 14 years punishing himself for a fire he didn't start. He wore those gloves every day, like a sentence he'd given himself, and nobody had ever thought to ask whether the sentence was just. Not because people didn't care, his brother cared, Rosemary cared in her brisk, practical way, but because grief that old and that private tends to build walls that look like personality. You think? That's just who he is. You stop looking for the door. I found the door by accident in a study full of fallen books on a Thursday night in May. What I want to say to anyone watching this, and I mean this without any pretense, is that the people carrying the heaviest things are often the ones who seem the most composed. They have had years of practice looking fine. What they need isn't someone to fix them or even to fully understand them. They need someone willing to stay in the room, to sit in the chair across from them and not make it strange, to say, quietly, "Don't put the glove back on." That takes a kind of courage that has nothing to do with bravery in the dramatic sense. It's smaller than that. It's the courage to stay curious about someone instead of deciding you already know what they are. It's the intelligence to understand that a person's silence is not the same as their emptiness. And it's the steadiness, the plain, unglamorous steadiness, to keep showing up to dinner even when the conversation is thin, because you understand that thin conversations are how trust gets built, before it knows it's being built. Liam has his house. His wife's garden survived the winter, and I have something I genuinely did not expect to have at this point in my life, which is the particular warmth of sitting in a room with someone and knowing without having to say it that you are both exactly where you're supposed to be. The cranes came back to the field in April. Same field, same pair. He pointed them out from the path before I'd even seen them. I think that's when I knew for certain. Some things return. Some things, If you're patient enough and honest enough and willing to make one very unusual decision in your 63rd year, turn out to be worth every uncomfortable moment that led you there.